Nobody walks away from Alexander Corvino. When the ruthless head of the New York underworld slid a billion-dollar marriage proposal across the mahogany desk, he expected absolute submission. Instead, Penelope Hayes, a brilliant, unapologetically fat forensic accountant who refused to shrink herself for anyone, laughed in his face and walked out. She thought she had won the power play. But by sunrise, her career, her home, and her entire identity would be completely erased. He didn't just want her silence. He wanted her soul. Rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 68th floor of the Corvino Tower in Manhattan. Penelope Hayes sat alone in the sprawling glass conference room, her thick fingers flying across the keyboard of her encrypted laptop. As a senior forensic auditor for Baker Tilly, a top-tier accounting firm, Penelope was used to uncovering financial discrepancies. However, what she was staring at tonight wasn't a simple rounding error or a mismanaged corporate expense account. It was a perfectly orchestrated $400 million money laundering syndicate hidden beneath the legitimate facade of Corvino Real Estate Holdings. Penelope was not the typical corporate drone. She was a large, heavy-set woman who carried her weight with an intimidating grace. Her soft, full face was framed by sharp glasses, and her thick thighs and broad hips took up space in a world that constantly demanded women make themselves smaller. She never apologized for her size. Her brilliance was her armor, and her unapologetic fatness was a filter that kept superficial people at a distance. Tonight, that armor was about to be tested by the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. Footsteps echoed against the Italian marble floor outside the conference room. Heavy, synchronized, and deliberate. Alexander Corvino entered the room like a shadow swallowing the light. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung to his athletic, predatory frame. His eyes were the color of shattered ice, cold and entirely devoid of human empathy. Flanked by two massive men whose tailored jackets barely concealed their shoulder holsters, Alexander waved a single hand. The bodyguards immediately stepped back out, closing the heavy glass doors behind them with a definitive click. Penelope didn't flinch. She adjusted her glasses, pushing her heavy frame deeper into the leather ergonomic chair, and met his icy stare. "You are working late, Miss Hayes," Alexander said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "Fraud doesn't sleep, Mr. Corvino," Penelope replied evenly, tapping the enter key to lock her screen. "And unfortunately for your shell companies in the Cayman Islands, neither do I." Alexander walked slowly towards the table, pulling out a chair opposite her. He did not look angry. If anything, a terrifying spark of amusement danced in his pale eyes. He studied her. He took in her soft, round cheeks, the deep curve of her chest pressing against her silk blouse, and the sheer, unadulterated defiance radiating from her posture. Men of great power were terrified of him. Politicians groveled at his feet. Yet this plus-size accountant, armed with nothing but a spreadsheet and a sharp tongue, was staring him down like he was a minor inconvenience. "You found the offshore logistics accounts," Alexander stated, clasping his large hands together on the table. "It wasn't a question. I found everything," Penelope corrected him, her tone strictly professional. "The dummy corporations tied to a shipping conglomerate in Naples. The inflated real estate appraisals in Tribeca used to clean the cash. I know about the $300 million routed through the fictional charity in Geneva. The FBI will have the encrypted file by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Alexander leaned back, an unreadable expression crossing his chiseled face. "You are an incredibly intelligent woman, Penelope. You are also entirely aware of who I really am, which means you must know that sending that file is a death sentence. Killing an auditor from Baker Tilly will only bring the federal government down on your head faster." Penelope shot back, her heart hammering against her ribs, though her voice remained remarkably steady. I have dead man switches in place. If I don't log in to my secure server by noon tomorrow, the files disseminate to 5 major news outlets and the Department of Justice. Paul. A slow, dangerous smile crept across Alexander's face. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found a prey worth hunting. He reached inside his breast pocket and pulled out a thick legal document, sliding it across the polished mahogany table toward her. Penelope glanced down. It wasn't a bribe. It wasn't a threat. It was a marriage license, already filled out with her name. Sitting right beneath it was a prenuptial agreement. "What is this?" she demanded, her thick brow furrowing in confusion. "Spousal privilege," Alexander said smoothly. "A wife cannot be compelled to testify against her husband. If you marry me, the feds lose their star witness. But more than that, Miss Hayes, I find myself deeply fascinated by you. You take up space. You demand to be seen. You possess a brilliant mind and a defiance that I have been searching for in a partner." He tapped the prenup with a heavy gold ring on his index finger. "Sign the paper. You become my wife. The prenup guarantees you $1 billion transferred into a private Swiss account in your name, accessible immediately. You will live like a queen. You will have power that extends far beyond a corporate auditing cubicle. All you have to do is say yes." Penelope stared at the paper, then looked up at the mob boss sitting across from her. $1 billion. It was a sum of money so astronomical it felt fictional. But to Alexander Corvino, it was merely the cost of doing business and the cost of acquiring her. She picked up the solid gold pen he had set beside the document. Alexander's eyes darkened with satisfaction, expecting her to yield to the immense pressure and wealth. Instead, Penelope flipped the pen around, using the blunt end to casually push the contract back across the table. "I don't sell my integrity, Mr. Corvino, and I certainly don't marry monsters to balance their ledgers," Penelope said, her voice dripping with disdain. She grabbed her laptop, shoving it into her leather tote bag. She stood up, her heavy frame towering slightly as she looked down at him. "Keep your $1 billion. I'll see you in federal court." Without waiting for a response, Penelope turned and walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking loudly against the marble. She expected a bullet in her back. She expected his guards to grab her. But nothing happened. Back in the room, Alexander Corvino watched her wide hips sway as she walked out, completely unfazed by his empire. His smile widened into something dark and obsessive. She had rejected the carrot. Now she would have to face the stick. Morning light usually brought comfort to Penelope, a quiet moment to drink her Earl Grey tea and prepare for the chaotic demands of corporate auditing. Today, however, the air in her cruddy Upper West Side apartment felt suffocatingly dense. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the terrifying reality of what she had done. She had directly defied Alexander Corvino. Pushing her heavy body out of bed, she moved to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. She was Penelope Hayes. She was untouchable. The evidence was secured. The encrypted files were ready to send to the FBI at 8 a.m. sharp. She just needed to get to the office. Leaving her apartment building, she walked briskly to the 72nd Street subway station. Rain was still drizzling over New York City, casting a dreary grey filter over the morning commuters. When she reached the turnstile, she swiped her Metro card. Insufficient fare. Frowning, Penelope tried again. The screen flashed red. Annoyed, she pulled out her Chase Sapphire debit card to reload it at the machine. She punched in $20 and swiped. Card declined. Please contact your institution. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She tried her American Express credit card. Declined. She tried her backup Discover card. Declined. Listen, lady, you holding up the line or what? A man in a business suit snapped from behind her. Flustered, Penelope dug into her purse, finding a single crumpled $10 bill to buy a single ride ticket. Her heart was beating a little faster now. It was just a banking glitch, she told herself. A massive, coincidental banking glitch. When she finally arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Baker Tilly, she swiped her employee badge at the security turnstiles in the lobby. Access denied. "Excuse me, Frank," Penelope said to the familiar security guard stationed at the desk. "My badge seems to be malfunctioning." Frank, a man she had brought donuts to every Friday for 3 years, looked at her with a mix of pity and absolute terror. He refused to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. You're not in the system." "What do you mean I'm not in the system? I'm the lead senior auditor," Penelope argued, her deep voice echoing in the marble lobby. Before Frank could answer, the elevator dinged, and Brenda, the director of human resources, stepped out. Brenda looked pale, clutching a manila folder tightly against her chest. She approached Penelope as if approaching a live bomb. "Penelope," Brenda whispered, glancing nervously around the lobby. "You need to leave." "Brenda, what is going on? My badge isn't working and my bank cards are acting up. I need to get up to my terminal to send a file to the DOJ." "There is no file," Brenda said, her voice shaking violently. "Our servers were completely wiped at 3 a.m. A massive cyber intrusion. Everything you worked on for the Corvino account is gone. And you've been terminated, Penelope. Effective immediately." Penelope's heavy chest heaved as she took a step back, the blood draining from her soft cheeks. "Terminated? For what? For doing my job? You can't do this. David has to sign off on a senior firing." "David resigned at 4 a.m. and boarded a flight to London," Brenda interrupted, thrusting the manila envelope into Penelope's hands. "You are blacklisted, Penelope. Your CPA license has been flagged for gross financial misconduct by the state board. Nobody in this city will ever hire you again. Please, just leave before building security has to forcefully remove you." Penelope stumbled backward out of the revolving doors, the chilly New York rain hitting her face. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in her mouth. The files were gone. Her job was gone. Her license was suspended. She pulled out her iPhone to call her sister in Chicago. She needed a lifeline. She dialed the number and held the phone to her ear. "We're sorry. The number you have reached is not in service. Your cellular account has been permanently suspended." A terrifying realization washed over her. Alexander Corvino hadn't just destroyed her evidence. He was dismantling her entire existence. Desperate, Penelope hailed a yellow cab, promising the driver she had cash in her apartment to pay him. She rode back to the Upper West Side in a daze, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the power Corvino wielded. To erase a person from the banking system, the corporate ladder, and the telecommunications grid in under 8 hours required a level of influence that was godlike. The cab pulled up to her brownstone. Penelope ran up the stoop, but before she could put her key in the lock, she noticed the bright orange sticker slapped across the heavy oak door. Notice of eviction and seizure. This property has been condemned for severe structural violations. Standing on the porch was her landlord, Mr. Henderson. He looked away in shame as Penelope approached. "Mr. Henderson, what is this? I paid my rent for the next 3 months." Penelope yelled, her voice finally breaking. "The city inspectors came at dawn, Penelope. They said the foundation is collapsing. I had to surrender the building to a private developer who bought the block this morning. Your belongings have already been moved to a storage facility in Queens. You can't be here." "A private developer?" Penelope breathed out, the rain soaking her hair, plastering it to her round face. "Who?" Mr. Henderson didn't answer. He just pointed toward the street. Penelope turned around, slowly. Parked silently in the pouring rain, right in front of the brownstone, was a sleek, midnight black Maybach. The tinted back window slowly rolled down with a soft mechanical hum. Sitting in the plush leather interior, illuminated by the soft ambient lighting of the luxury vehicle, was Alexander Corvino. He wasn't smiling anymore, his eyes locked onto her trembling, rain-soaked figure, analyzing how the defiant woman from the night before had been reduced to a ghost in a matter of hours. He leaned slightly toward the open window, his deep voice slicing effortlessly through the sound of the rain. "Get in the car, Penelope." Penelope stood frozen on the sidewalk, the freezing rain seeping through her wool coat, chilling her to the bone. Her mind calculated the variables of her completely dismantled reality. She had no phone, no money, no identification, and no safe haven. Going to the police would be useless. A man who could erase her digital footprint at Baker Tilly and condemn her Upper West Side apartment building before breakfast certainly had the NYPD commissioner in his pocket. She was entirely out of options. With a trembling but resolute breath, she stepped forward, her heavy boots splashing in the puddles, and slid into the cavernous, heated back seat of the Maybach. The heavy door pulled shut with a soft, vacuum-sealed thud, instantly cutting off the sounds of the chaotic New York streets. Inside, the car smelled of rich cedar, expensive leather, and the faint, masculine scent of bergamot. Alexander Corvino sat next to her, giving her a wide berth. He did not look triumphant. He looked deeply, intensely focused. "You are ruining my leather," Alexander noted softly, gesturing to her soaking wet clothes. He reached into a hidden compartment and produced a thick, heated cashmere blanket, laying it gently across her broad, shivering shoulders. Penelope clutched the blanket, her wet hair plastered to her round cheeks. She glared at him, her chest heaving with a mixture of terror and absolute rage. "You are a monster. You destroyed my life. I spent 12 years building my career, auditing for firms like Deloitte and Baker Tilly, and you wiped it out in 6 hours. I did not destroy your life, Penelope. I expedited your departure from a mediocre existence," Alexander replied, his deep voice unnervingly calm as the driver pulled the Maybach smoothly into the chaotic morning traffic, heading toward the FDR Drive. "You were making $300,000 a year to find pennies for corporate executives who would replace you tomorrow. You are a genius. You belong in an empire, not a cubicle. I belong in a prison now, thanks to whatever you planted to flag my CPA license," she spat, wiping rainwater from her thick-framed glasses. "Where are we going?" "We are going to my estate in Southampton," Alexander stated, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the console. He offered her one, but she refused. He took a slow sip. "And I did not wipe your life merely to punish you for rejecting my proposal. I did it to keep you breathing." Penelope scoffed, crossing her thick arms over her chest. "Right. The classic abusive tactic. You ruin me to save me." Alexander's eyes flashed with a sudden, dark intensity. He leaned closer, invading her personal space. The sheer size of his broad shoulders momentarily eclipsed the ambient light of the cabin. The $400 million you found missing in the Cayman Islands accounts? I didn't move it. Someone in my organization stole it from me. Someone very close to me. And whoever it is, they knew Baker Tilly was conducting an internal audit for the state. They wanted you to find those discrepancies. They wanted you to hand that encrypted file to the FBI so the federal government would tear down my operations, leaving a massive power vacuum. Penelope's breath hitched. Her brilliant, analytical mind immediately began processing this new information. If Alexander Corvino hadn't moved the money, then the layered shell structures and the dummy corporations in Naples were a setup, a brilliant, mathematically flawless setup designed to frame the boss. "You're telling me you have a mole," Penelope said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "I am telling you I have a traitor," Alexander corrected, his jaw tightening. "A traitor who sent a 3-man hit squad to your Upper West Side apartment at 4:30 a.m. this morning. The structural damage notice your landlord received? That was my people bribing the city inspectors to get you out of the building before the assassins arrived. I erased your banking and your phone lines so the traitor's hackers couldn't track your location via GPS or transactions. I took everything from you, Penelope, because it was the only way to make you invisible." Penelope stared at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted to call him a liar. She wanted to scream that it was all a manipulation. But her forensic mind recalled the digital footprints she had analyzed the night before. The routing numbers tied to the Geneva charity had seemed almost too obvious. The breadcrumbs had been laid out perfectly for an auditor to find. It was a trap. "Why me?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "You have hundreds of accountants on your payroll." "Because they are loyal to my underbosses, and I cannot trust a single one of them," Alexander said, his gaze dropping momentarily to the soft, heavy curve of her thighs under her wet skirt. A flash of undeniable hunger in his icy eyes. "I need an outsider. I need a woman who has the audacity to look a billionaire mafia boss in the eye and tell him to go to hell. I need your brilliant mind, Penelope. I need you to trace that 400 million and give me a name." "And if I refuse?" she challenged, lifting her chin to expose her soft, thick throat. "Then I will hand you a new passport, $50 million in untraceable bonds, and a private jet to anywhere in the world," Alexander promised, his voice thick with a strange, possessive reverence. "But you will never be safe from the people trying to kill me. Stay. Marry me. Let me protect you, and let us destroy them together." The Maybach sped down the highway, the rain washing the windows. Penelope Hayes, the fiercely independent fat woman who had never needed anyone, suddenly realized she was caught in the center of a deadly underworld war, and the only way out was through. Heavy iron gates parted like the Red Sea as the Maybach approached the sprawling, high-security perimeter of the Corvino estate in Southampton. Penelope peered through the tinted glass, her breath fogging the window. The property was a fortress masquerading as a modern architectural masterpiece. Massive concrete walls were softened by meticulously manicured ivy, and armed guards in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter with imposing German shepherds. Beyond the security checkpoint sat a breathtaking 40-room mansion overlooking the grey, churning Atlantic Ocean. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Hayes," Alexander said, his tone shifting back to the authoritative, commanding cadence of a ruthless boss. "I haven't agreed to anything," Penelope reminded him sharply, clutching her damp coat around her full figure. "Your survival instinct will catch up with your pride eventually," he replied smoothly as the car rolled to a stop at the grand entrance. The massive mahogany front doors swung open before the driver even cut the engine. A stern, older woman in a crisp, tailored grey suit waited on the limestone steps, holding a large umbrella. She was introduced as Mrs. Higgins, the estate manager. "Take Miss Hayes to the East Wing," Alexander instructed, not waiting for Penelope to step out completely. "Draw her a hot bath, provide her with whatever clothing she requires, and have a hot meal sent to her suite. She is not a prisoner, Mrs. Higgins. She is an honored guest. Treat her with the utmost respect." Penelope was immediately whisked away into the cavernous interior of the mansion. The sheer opulence of the estate was dizzying. Original Renaissance paintings hung on Venetian plaster walls, and massive Swarovski crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand hallways. Despite the luxury, Penelope felt the distinct, suffocating weight of a gilded cage. Her suite in the East Wing was larger than her entire New York apartment. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows offered a sweeping view of the stormy beach. After a blistering hot shower that finally washed the freezing dampness from her bones, Penelope found a wardrobe completely stocked with high-end designer clothing. To her profound shock, every single item was perfectly tailored to her plus-size body. Size 20 silk blouses, custom-made wide-calf leather boots, and luxurious cashmere sweaters that would comfortably drape over her wide hips and heavy chest. She frowned, pulling on a soft emerald-green sweater and a pair of tailored black slacks. He had planned this. Alexander Corvino had known her exact measurements well before last night's confrontation. The level of his obsession sent a shiver down her spine, a confusing mix of violation and a dark, forbidden thrill. Society had always told her to hide her body, to shrink. Alexander had explicitly curated a wardrobe designed to showcase her powerful soft curves. An hour later, a heavy knock echoed through her suite. The door swung open, and Alexander entered her door, carrying a sleek silver briefcase. He had changed into a dark navy turtleneck and tailored trousers, looking less like a CEO and more like a lethal predator relaxing in his den. He set the briefcase on the solid oak desk in the corner of her room and popped the locks. "Your new workstation," he announced. Penelope cautiously approached the desk. Inside the briefcase was a state-of-the-art encrypted laptop, a secure satellite phone, and 3 thick ledgers bound in black leather. "These are the raw, unedited financial logs of my 5 top lieutenants," Alexander explained, stepping behind her. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from his massive chest against her back. No shell companies, no fake charities, just the brutal, bloody math of the Corvino syndicate. The $400 million was siphoned out through a microtransaction kiting scheme over the last 18 months. I need you to find the bleeding artery. Penelope looked at the ledgers. Her accountant brain, the side of her that thrived on chaos and puzzles, immediately fired to life. Microtransaction kiting? That requires a direct backdoor into the SWIFT banking system. Only a few financial institutions have that kind of blind spot access. Credit Suisse, maybe Barclays. "Exactly," Alexander murmured, his voice rumbling near her ear. His large, calloused hand slowly came up, resting heavily on her thick waist. The touch was entirely possessive, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. She gasped softly, her body betraying her logical mind. "You see the matrix, Penelope. You see the numbers as a living, breathing entity." "Don't touch me," she whispered, though she made no move to step away from his solid warmth. "I admire you," he confessed softly, his thumb gently stroking the curve of her hip. "Men in my world value frail, silent women who look pretty in the background. But you are a force of nature. You are substantial. You take up the space you deserve, and you yield to absolutely no one. It is incredibly intoxicating. Penelope finally pulled away, her cheeks burning hot. She turned to face him, forcing her professional mask back into place. Flattery won't make me your obedient pet, Alexander. If I do this, if I find the traitor who stole your money and tried to kill me, I want my terms. Alexander's eyes gleamed with raw amusement and respect. Name them. I don't just get my life back, she demanded, her voice steady and loud in the quiet room. I want full control of your legitimate corporate portfolio. I become the chief financial officer of Corvino Holdings. No more shadow games. I clean your legitimate money, and I run the board. And the billion-dollar prenup? We tear it up. If I save your empire, I own half of it. The silence in the room was deafening. She was demanding half of a Mafia kingpin's empire. It was an audacious, suicidal request. Slowly, a dark, brilliant smile broke across Alexander Corvino's face. He reached out, gently gripping her chin with his rough fingers, forcing her to look deep into his icy, dangerous eyes. Deal, he whispered. Now let's go hunt a traitor. Midnight approached with a heavy, oppressive silence over the sprawling Southampton estate, broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic waves against the cliffs outside. Inside the East Wing suite, the air was thick with the scent of ozone from overheating electronics and the rich, dark aroma of espresso. Penelope Hayes sat hunched over the silver-encrypted laptop, her thick fingers flying across the backlit keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. 3 external monitors, provided by the estate's IT staff at her demand, glowed brightly, casting a harsh blue light over her soft, concentrated features. Data streamed across the screens in dizzying cascades. To a layman, it was a meaningless matrix of numbers, roting codes, and foreign alphabets. To Penelope, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of corporate sin. She was using a customized iteration of Palantir Gotham, an advanced data integration platform she had covertly acquired during her time auditing military contractors. She cross-referenced the raw Corvino syndicate ledgers against the Swift banking network's international transfer logs. The $400 million hadn't just vanished. Money of that volume possessed a gravitational pull. It left a digital footprint, no matter how desperately the thief tried to scrub the blockchain. Alexander Corvino sat in a plush leather armchair in the shadows of the suite, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He had shed his tailored jacket hours ago, the sleeves of his dark turtleneck pushed up to reveal thick forearms covered in faded violent ink. He was a man accustomed to violence, a man who ruled the New York underworld through fear and absolute authority. Yet here he was, entirely captivated by a plus-size forensic accountant in an emerald sweater, surgically dismantling his empire's financial arteries. "You are staring, Alexander," Penelope murmured, without looking away from her primary monitor, her voice a low, raspy purr of pure concentration. "I am observing an artist at work," he replied smoothly, the deep timbre of his voice vibrating in the quiet room. He stood up slowly, crossing the plush Persian rug with the silent, predatory grace of a large cat. He stopped just behind her ergonomic chair, leaning over her shoulder. The heat radiating from his massive frame enveloped her, an intoxicating contrast to the cold, analytical task at hand. "What do the numbers tell you, Penelope? Who is holding the knife to my throat?" Penelope took a deep breath, fighting the sudden, heavy flutter in her stomach caused by his proximity. She pointed a manicured finger at a cluster of transactions highlighted in glaring red on the center screen. The thief is incredibly disciplined. They didn't just wire the funds to the Cayman Islands. They used a technique called micro-transaction kiting. Over the course of 18 months, they siphoned fractions of a % from your legitimate real estate holdings in Hudson Yards and your import logistics companies. "Pennies," Alexander muttered, his jaw tightening as he stared at the screen. "Hundreds of thousands of pennies a day," Penelope corrected, tapping a key to expand the view. They routed those fractions through dummy accounts at Deutsche Bank, converted them into decentralized cryptocurrency via offshore exchanges, and then consolidated the assets in a trust managed by a private wealth firm in Geneva. It is a masterpiece of financial obfuscation. But they made one catastrophic mistake. Alexander's hands came down to rest on the sturdy armrests of her chair, effectively trapping her between his muscular body and the desk. "Show me." They assumed nobody would ever look at the metadata of the authorization tokens, Penelope explained, her heart hammering against her ribs as she felt his breath brush the sensitive skin of her neck. She typed a rapid command sequence, bringing up a secure server log. To authorize a transfer of that magnitude out of your primary holding accounts, the bank requires biometric verification, a thumbprint, a retinal scan, or an encrypted physical key fob. I ran a diagnostic on the IP addresses that pinged the server during the largest transfer anomalies. The IP addresses were masked by a VPN, bouncing through Reykjavik and Singapore. "But," Alexander prompted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But the MAC address, the unique hardware identifier of the actual computer used to authorize the transfer, is hard-coded," Penelope said, turning her head slightly. Her soft lips were mere inches from his sharp jawline. "I traced the MAC address. The transfers weren't made from a burner laptop in a foreign country. They were made from a machine physically located on the 68th floor of the Corvino Tower in Manhattan." Alexander went perfectly still. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. "The executive floor. My floor. The authorization didn't come from your terminal, Alexander," Penelope continued, her voice steady despite the sheer terror radiating from the man behind her. She brought up the final verification screen, displaying the registered user of the compromised hardware. "It came from the terminal registered to your chief operating officer, Harrison Cole." The silence that followed was terrifying. Harrison Cole wasn't just an employee. He was Alexander's right-hand man, the architect of the syndicate's transition into legitimate corporate enterprises. Alexander slowly straightened up, his icy blue eyes turning black with absolute, unadulterated fury. The sophisticated CEO vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless Mafia boss who had built an empire on blood. "Harrison," he whispered, the name sounding like a death sentence. "He knew the Baker Tilly audit was coming. He hired you to find the discrepancy, knowing it would trigger a federal investigation that would dismantle my leadership, leaving him to take the throne with $400 million in clean cash. He manipulated the system flawlessly," Penelope said, closing the Palantir terminal. "But he didn't account for me. He didn't realize I would refuse to be intimidated by the numbers. He underestimated my capability, just like the rest of the world always has." Alexander reached down, his large hands gently gripping her thick shoulders. He turned her chair around, so she was fully facing him. He looked down at her, his expression a complex mixture of lethal rage directed at his betrayer and overwhelming, consuming awe directed at the woman sitting before him. "He underestimated you," Alexander agreed, his voice thick with raw emotion. He reached out, his knuckles grazing the soft, full curve of her cheek. But I never will. You just handed me the head of my betrayer, Penelope. You have secured your place in this empire. Now we take everything from him. Betrayal tasted like copper and old blood. Alexander Corvino stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out into the pitch-black storm, calculating the exact method by which he would dismantle Harrison Cole. Behind him, Penelope was already pulling up the administrative back doors she possessed from her time auditing the financial institutions tied to the Corvino accounts. If Harrison had the money consolidated in Geneva, she needed to freeze the routing numbers before he realized his digital ghost had been spotted. Suddenly, the heavy crystal chandelier above them flickered. Once, twice. Then the entire east wing plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The low mechanical hum of the estate's climate control ground to a halt. Outside the heavy suite doors, the subtle sounds of the mansion's usual nighttime operations ceased entirely. The silence was deafening. "Alexander," Penelope asked, her voice tight with immediate panic. "Stay exactly where you are," Alexander commanded. The rustle of fabric indicated he was moving rapidly through the dark. A second later, the metallic sh-clack of a heavy slide being racked echoed in the pitch-black room. He had armed himself. "The backup generators should kick in automatically," Penelope said, her fingers hovering blindly over the keyboard, unless the main line was intentionally severed past the fail-safes. "The Cisco security grid is hardwired on an independent circuit. It doesn't go down from a storm," Alexander said, his voice cold and analytical. He moved back to her side, a heavy tactical flashlight snapping on, casting a harsh beam across the room. In his other hand, he held a matte black Sig Sauer P226. "Harrison knows. He monitored my encrypted communications. He knows I brought you here instead of killing you. He knows you're tracking the money." "He sent them," Penelope breathed, the reality of the situation slamming into her chest like a physical blow. The hit squad that had missed her in New York had followed them to Southampton. "Get under the desk," Alexander ordered, his eyes locked on the heavy mahogany doors of the suite. "Do not come out until I tell you." "I can't," Penelope shot back, her stubborn defiance flaring even in the face of death. The emergency battery backup of her laptop kicked in, the 3 screens illuminating her face in a pale, ghostly light. "Harrison is initiating the final transfer. The Palantir system is flagging a massive blockchain conversion. He's moving the 400 million into untraceable offshore crypto wallets right now. If he completes this transfer, the money disappears forever, and he uses it to buy the loyalty of your lieutenants." Alexander looked at her, his tactical mind assessing the variables. "How long to freeze the accounts?" 3 minutes. I have to spoof a multi-factor authentication protocol through the JP Morgan compliance server to trigger an automatic federal freeze," Penelope said, her thick fingers already flying across the keys. Her heart was beating so fast it threatened to crack her ribs, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. "I need 3 minutes, Alexander." "I will give you 4, he promised grimly. Heavy tactical footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The Corvino estate guards had either been compromised by Harrison's payroll or neutralized. Boom! The heavy oak door splintered inward as a breaching charge blew the hinges clean off the frame. Smoke and drywall dust billowed into the suite. 3 men, clad in black tactical gear and Kevlar vests, poured through the breach, suppressed submachine guns raised. Alexander didn't hesitate. He stepped directly in front of the desk, shielding Penelope's body with his own massive frame. He raised the Sig Sauer, his face an emotionless mask of lethal efficiency. He fired twice. The sharp, deafening cracks echoed in the enclosed space. The lead attacker dropped instantly, 2 rounds perfectly placed in the center of his visor. Penelope flinched at the noise, tears of sheer adrenaline blurring her vision, but she forced her eyes to remain locked on the screens. She typed a rapid sequence of commands, exploiting a known vulnerability in the Swift network's temporary holding protocol. Transfer 42% complete. Bullets tore through the suite, shattering the monitors on the periphery, raining glass and plastic down onto Penelope's broad shoulders. She ignored the debris, ignored the terrifying sounds of men dying mere feet away from her. She was a forensic auditor. The numbers were her battlefield. Alexander moved with terrifying speed, diving behind a heavy marble pillar as the remaining 2 assassins focused their fire. The plush leather armchair Penelope had occupied earlier was torn to shreds by a hail of bullets. Transfer 68% complete. "Come on, come on," Penelope whispered frantically, initiating the spoofed J.P. Morgan override credential. The system demanded a secondary authorization. She ruthlessly bypassed it, using a 0-day exploit she had discovered years ago. Alexander returned fire, dropping the second man with a shot to the exposed throat above the Kevlar line. The final assassin realized the tactical disadvantage and threw a flashbang grenade toward the desk. "Close your eyes!" Alexander roared. Penelope slammed her eyes shut and covered her ears. The grenade detonated with a blinding flash and a concussive roar that vibrated through her heavy bones, disorienting her completely. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Through the smoke, the final assassin rushed the desk, aiming his weapon directly at the laptop. Before the man could pull the trigger, Alexander launched his massive body across the room, tackling the assassin to the floor. The 2 heavy men crashed into the antique bookshelves, splintering wood and shattering glass. A brutal, hand-to-hand struggle ensued in the darkness. Penelope forced her eyes open, blinking away the spots. Transfer 94% complete. She slammed her hand down on the Enter key, executing the freeze command. A red banner flashed across all 3 screens. Federal compliance freeze initiated. Assets locked in escrow. Transfer failed. She had done it. The $400 million was frozen dead in the water. Harrison Cole was completely cut off from the funds. A sickening snap echoed from the corner of the room, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Alexander stepped out of the shadows, breathing heavily, blood smeared across his sharp jawline. He looked at the shattered room, then at the glowing red banner on the screen, and finally at Penelope. She sat behind the desk, her emerald sweater covered in dust, her thick frame trembling uncontrollably as the adrenaline began to crash. Alexander dropped his weapon on the desk. He reached down, pulling her heavy, shaking body up from the chair and directly into his chest. He wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face in her dusty hair. "You got it," he whispered fiercely, his heart pounding against hers. "You brilliant, magnificent woman. You got it." Penelope collapsed against him, her arms wrapping around his thick waist. She had survived the night. She had saved his empire. And as he held her in the ruins of the shattered suite, she realized with terrifying clarity that she was no longer just an auditor. She was the queen of the Corvino syndicate. Dawn broke over the churning Atlantic, painting the storm-ravaged sky in bruised shades of violet, crimson, and gold. Inside the heavily guarded walls of the Southampton estate, the terrifying chaos of the night had been replaced by the cold, meticulous efficiency of the Corvino Syndicate's cleanup crew. Bodies had been silently removed, shattered glass swept away into neat piles, and the breached oak doors replaced with temporary steel barricades. Penelope stood in the exact center of Alexander's massive wood-paneled private study. She was wearing a dark, plum, custom-tailored suit that Mrs. Higgins had somehow procured by sunrise. The rich, heavy fabric hugged her broad hips and thick thighs, accentuating her imposing, powerful silhouette. She ran her hands down the front of her jacket, feeling the fine stitching. She no longer felt like a terrified corporate accountant running for her life. She felt like a sovereign, surveying her newly conquered domain. Alexander leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk. He wore dark trousers and a fresh white dress shirt stretched tight across his broad chest, the top 3 buttons undone to reveal a hint of the dark ink marking his collarbone. He watched her with a heavy, unblinking gaze that felt like a physical caress, tracking every confident movement she made. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed in the stone corridor outside. 2 massive enforcers entered the study, dragging a bloodied, violently bruised Harrison Cole between them. The former chief operating officer, a man who had commanded fear across the eastern seaboard, was unceremoniously thrown to the center of the plush Persian rug. He coughed, looking up. His arrogant sneer faltered instantly as his eyes bypassed his boss and landed on the large, imposing woman standing beside the desk. "Harrison," Alexander greeted, his voice dangerously soft, possessing the lethal calm of a drawn blade. "You look tired." Harrison spat a glob of blood onto the floor, his face twisting with pure venom as he glared at Penelope. "You let a glorified number cruncher take down the Empire? A pathetic, oversized desk jockey? She got lucky, Corvino. My men will regroup. They will hit you again by nightfall." Penelope didn't shrink under his hateful, derogatory glare. She had spent a lifetime dealing with men who tried to diminish her because of her size. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward, the heavy heels of her leather boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her deep, authoritative voice commanded the massive room. "Your men are currently boarding commercial flights to South America, Harrison, because their payroll bounced," Penelope stated coldly. "As of 6 o'clock this morning, I didn't just freeze your offshore crypto wallets. I systematically dismantled your entire digital existence." Harrison's pale, beaten face drained of its remaining color. "What are you talking about?" "I used the exact same protocols you utilized to erase me yesterday morning," Penelope explained, looking down at him with absolute disdain. "I flagged your biometric passport with Interpol for international terrorism financing. I emptied your private Cayman trusts, bypassed the escrow, and routed the capital directly back into the Corvino Real Estate Holdings accounts. I even triggered a hostile foreclosure on your penthouse in Tribeca. You have no money, no identity, and absolutely no leverage. You are completely, utterly invisible to the world." Harrison stared at her in horrified, absolute silence. He turned his desperate, wide eyes to his former boss. "Alexander, listen to me. She's a massive liability. You can't trust an outsider with this level of administrative clearance. She will ruin us." Alexander pushed himself off the mahogany desk, walking slowly toward the man who had been his trusted right hand for a decade. "She is not an outsider, Harrison. She is the brilliant architect of your absolute ruin." He didn't even bother to pull his weapon. He just gestured dismissively to his enforcers. "Take him to the harbor. You know what to do with traitors." Harrison began to scream, thrashing wildly as he was dragged backward out of the study. His frantic pleas echoed down the stone hall until the heavy steel doors slammed shut, plunging the room back into a heavy, intimate silence. Penelope exhaled a long, shaky breath, her thick shoulders dropping slightly as the lingering adrenaline finally began to leave her system. She turned around to find Alexander standing only inches away, completely invading her personal space. "You are incredibly terrifying," Alexander murmured, lifting a large, calloused hand to brush a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was shockingly gentle, a stark, breathtaking contrast to the brutal violence he commanded mere seconds ago. "I told you I don't balance ledgers for monsters," Penelope replied, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs as she looked up into his icy blue eyes. "I just destroyed one," Alexander smiled, a genuine, breathtaking expression that entirely transformed his sharp, predatory features. He turned to his desk, picking up a thick, leather-bound portfolio and handed it directly to her. Penelope opened it cautiously. Inside were fresh legal documents, heavily notarized, stamped, and completely binding. They were the master articles of incorporation for Corvino Holdings. She scanned the executive structure with her trained eyes. Her name, Penelope Hayes, was listed directly at the top as the chief financial officer and 50% majority shareholder of all legitimate syndicate enterprises. "You actually did it," she breathed, staring at the staggering transfer of wealth and absolute power resting in her hands. "I keep my promises to the people who prove their loyalty," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a low, rough whisper. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. Mafia kings knelt for absolutely no one. But he opened the box to reveal a massive, flawless emerald-cut diamond ring that caught the morning sunlight like liquid fire. "Yesterday, I offered you $1 billion to buy your silence and force your compliance," Alexander stated, his eyes locked onto hers with burning, undeniable intensity. "Today, I am offering you half of my entire world because I cannot rule it without you. You are brilliant. You are magnificent. You are exactly the fierce, untouchable queen this syndicate needs. Marry me, Penelope. Not as a hostage, as my true equal." Penelope looked at the spectacular ring, then at the lethal man offering it. He didn't want her to change. He didn't want her to shrink, hide, or conform to an impossible societal standard. He actively worshipped the space she took up. He had seen her intellect, her far, and her heavy, beautiful body, and he had surrendered his entire empire just to keep her by his side. She reached out, her soft, thick fingers tracing the sharp, rough line of his jaw. "I want full veto power on all international real estate acquisitions," she demanded softly, a wicked, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Alexander let out a rough, breathless laugh, wrapping his massive, heavily tattooed arms around her thick waist and pulling her flush against his solid chest. "You can have absolutely anything you want, Mia Regina." "Then yes," Penelope whispered, right before his lips crashed down onto hers. The kiss was entirely consuming, tasting of danger, hard-won victory, and a dark, unbreakable promise. Penelope Hayes had lost her mediocre, quiet life in a matter of hours. But as she stood in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York, she knew she had gained something infinitely better. She hadn't just survived the deadly underworld. She had completely conquered it. Penelope's incredible journey from an underestimated, brilliant accountant to the undisputed queen of the Corvino Empire proves that true power comes from never shrinking yourself to fit someone else's mold. She took control of her narrative, completely dismantling her enemies while embracing her beautiful, powerful body and her undeniable intellect. What was your favorite twist in this billion-dollar mafia romance? Drop a comment below and let us know. If you loved Penelope's fierce defiance and Alexander's dark obsession, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and absolutely subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.